is a Dentistry, a channel which features easy explanation of various medical and dental related topics. And our today's topic is Sharpies fibers. So without any further delay, let's get started. Moving on towards the contents. So today we'll be studying Sharpies fiber under introduction, structure and composition, location and insertion, functions, Sharpies fibers in health and disease, clinical relevance, and the summary. Fibers by definition are collagen bundles of periodontal ligament which are embedded into the cementum and alveolar bone. Right, so on one side these ligaments which are derived from the periodontal ligament are connected to the cementum, and on the other side they are connected to the alveolar bone. Now the chief function of Sharpies fibers is that they provide anchorage and support and thereby ensure the stability of the tooth within the socket. In this diagram, so these are the Sharpies fibers, right? These all are Sharpies fibers. So here we can see on one end these are embedded into the alveolar bone proper. So these are all the Sharpies fibers which are getting embedded into the alveolar bone. And on the other side we can see these are the Sharpies fibers, right? These are the Sharpies fibers which are getting embedded into the cementum. These are those Sharpies fibers which are getting embedded into the cementum. So basically these are bundles of collagen which are embedded into the cementum and alveolar bone, thereby ensuring the stability of the tooth within the socket, and of course they are part of the PDL. Right? Now the orientation of these fibers are similar to that of the ligaments of periodontal bundles, right? And these are more numerous but smaller at their attachment into the cementum, right? So here we can see these are small fibers which are getting embedded into the cementum, whereas on the side of alveolar bone these are relatively larger fibers, right? These are relatively large fibers. So Sharpies fibers in the acellular cementum are fully mineralized. Cellular cementum and alveolar bone are partially mineralized, right? So the fibers which are located within the acellular cementum are completely mineralized fibers, and within the cellular cementum they are partly mineralized. Okay, now based on this we can also classify cementum, right? So there are few fibers which pass uninterruptedly through the alveolar bone into the alveolar process, right? So this is the alveolar bone. Now what will happen? Some of the bundles will pass through the alveolar bone into the alveolar process, and such fibers are then known as transalveolar fibers. Transalveolar fibers, right? Because they are passing uninterruptedly through the alveolar bone, right, into the alveolar processes of the jaw. Moving on to structure and composition. They are composed of type 1 collagen, right? Now some of these fibers are mineralized in the bone and cementum, but their intermediate portion is relatively unmineralized. Okay, coming towards the orientation, so they are located perpendicular or oblique to the surface of cementum and bone, right? So here we can see these are either located perpendicularly or obliquely to the surface of bone as well as cementum. Moving on to location and insertion. So where exactly are these fibers inserted at? First of all, obviously according to the definition they are inserted into cementum, right? So basically in the cementum the inner end of the fibers are tightly integrated. Okay, and in case of alveolar bone the outer end of the Sharpies fibers are embedded, right, into the bone matrix. Now there are also certain key structures in which these fibers are present, right, which are integral to the attachment of the tooth to its supporting structures, right, including the periodontium itself. Understand the attachment of the Sharpies fibers, right? So this part is dentine here. Then we have the cemental layer here, right? And these fibers, these are nothing but our Sharpies fibers, right? And on this side we have the PDL and various cells of the periodontal ligament, and these are the alveolar bone. Now this is the alveolar bone with the osteoblasts, right? So as we can see, these fibers are penetrated into the cemental layer, right? Therefore they are providing a robust attachment point. Okay, in the periodontal ligament we can see here, right? So these form integral components of the PDL and contribute to the stability of the tooth and also its ability to withstand heavy masticatory forces, right? As these are strong fibers, these are able to withstand the masticatory forces which are present during the chewing cycle, right? Now within the alveolar bone here, right here within the alveolar bone, the fibers are extended from the cemental surface, okay, first of all, and they ensure that the tooth is firmly anchored within the socket, right, within the jaw. So that was all about the attachment of Sharpie's fibers. Now here this is also a very good diagram. See, here it is depicting at the cementum point the Sharpie's fibers are thinner. See, these are thinner fibers, right? This part is the periodontal ligament space which is present, and these are nothing but the Sharpie's fibers, right? These are the Sharpie's fibers, and see how they are extending from the cementum towards the alveolar bone. Also kindly take a note of the density of the fiber. So in the region of cementum these are very thin and these are, right, and whereas in case of the alveolar bone the fibers are thicker, right, they are very thick toward as they move towards the alveolar bone, right. Moving on to functions. So the first and most important function of Sharpie's fiber is nothing but the mechanical support, right? So as we have discussed previously that they are a key part which ensures the stability of the tooth within the socket, right? So therefore its first function is nothing but anchorage of the tooth within the socket, right? And obviously the next function would be prevention of tooth displacement, right? So these fibers, they pass from cementum towards the alveolar bone, right? These are passing from cementum towards the alveolar bone, and these are providing anchorage. These are providing an anchorage point to the tooth so that the tooth does not get displaced within the socket, right? So Sharpie's fibers are embedded deeply into the cementum on one end and alveolar bone onto the other, securing the tooth firmly within the alveolus, right? This ensures stability during mastication. Then prevention of tooth displacement. These fibers resist heavy forces that could otherwise displace the tooth laterally, apically or occlusally, right? So whenever forces of mastication are present, right, so they tend to displace the tooth in all possible directions, like either laterally or apically or occlusally, right? So these fibers basically maintain the integrity of the tooth within the socket, okay. Next function is shock absorption, okay. So these fibers ensure equal distribution of forces, right, across the PDL, okay. These help distribute and dissipate the occlusal biting forces across the alveolar bone, protecting the tooth as well as the surrounding bone from trauma, right. So whenever there are huge amount of occlusal forces, these fibers, what they will do, they will resist this forces and act as a cushion, right. They will provide a cushioning effect and protect the tooth as well as bone from the trauma. Other function is adaptation to stress, right. Now we have discussed previously that either they will be oriented perpendicularly or they are present obliquely, right. So these oblique orientation allows them to stretch and absorb the compressive forces, right, acting like a suspension bridge to cushion the impact of the forces, okay. So this is about the shock absorption property. It will distribute the forces as well as it will help the tooth to adapt to the stresses, okay. So here's a diagram depicting function of Sharpie's fibers. So here we can see these are the fibers. On one end they are embedded into the alveolar bone here, and on the another end into the cementum, right. So you can remember it as a tooth within a socket, right. So first function we have discussed was the mechanical support, right. So here we can see all these bundles of fiber. What they are doing, they are providing a means of anchorage for the tooth within the alveolar bone, okay. So that is the first function. It is providing anchorage. So when something is providing an anchorage, obviously it is preventing certain kind of displacement, right. When I say something is providing me a means of anchorage, obviously it is preventing a movement or a displacement in apical direction, occlusal direction as well as laterally, right, as well as laterally. So the first function was mechanical support, right? The first function was mechanical support, under which we have seen in this diagram, obviously it is providing anchorage and preventing displacement. So we have anchorage and prevention of displacement. Very easy to remember, right? Next we have seen shock absorption property. Okay, so whenever any forces are directed towards the tooth, right? So tooth is a hard structure and it is connected to this alveolar bone or the socket through these fibers. Like why? Because we need a cushion. We need something like a cushion which can resist those occlusal forces. Like, so the main theme here is the cushioning effect, right? The shock absorption property is related to first equal distribution of forces. Now look at this arrangement. Look at this arrangement. Here we can see there is a proper arrangement made by the nature so that there is equal distribution of forces from the tooth to the bone. From the tooth to the bone, right? So this is the first sub point under shock absorption, that is equal distribution of forces, and second is obviously adaptation to stress, right? By providing a cushioning effect, these fibers are providing an adaptation to the stress. Moving on to the third and fourth function, again one of the extension of previous two functions which we have seen, right? So by attachment of by attaching to cementum and the bone, these fibers maintain the structural integrity within the PDL, right? Which again supports the tooth within the socket. Then it helps in interconnection, right? So as they are linking to surrounding tissues, right? So they are facilitating the coordination of movement as well as resistance to masticatory forces. Okay, so they are maintaining first of all attachment and second interconnection with other structures as well. Then we have facilitation of tooth mobility. Okay, so these Sharpie's fibers allow slight mobility of the tooth, right? We have discussed previously, they are acting as a cushion, right? So they are allowing slight mobility of the tooth within the socket. Now this is very essential for accommodating the functional stresses without causing any damage. Okay, so this slight amount of mobility is very essential to prevent damage to the tooth as well as to the bone. Now there is a orthodontic relevance point as well. So what happens during the orthodontic treatment, the Sharpie's fibers adapt, right? These are subjected to adaptation by remodeling under the control forces, right? So by putting up braces, what we are doing, we are providing some kind of forces as per our desire, okay? So that we can move the tooth in a way we want, right? So these Sharpie's fibers adapt by remodeling under those control orthodontic forces, enabling the tooth movement while maintaining the attachment, right? So we don't want loss of attachment, that will lead to PDL problems. So these Sharpie's fibers are very important from the orthodontic perspective as well, right? So by remodeling, they adapt to those control forces and enable tooth movement while maintaining the attachment, right? By preventing the loss of attachment. Here we can see Sharpie's fibers getting attached to the bone as well as to the cementum, right? To the alveolar bone and the cementum. So this helps in maintaining the integrity, right? This helps in maintaining the integrity of the pedontium. Also, we can demarcate the interconnectedness of the Sharpie's fibers with the other structures, right? So this facilitates controlled movement of the tooth within the socket. Okay, and also resistance to the forces of mastication which are delivered onto the tooth surface, right? Then we have talked about control movement, right? So these Sharpie's fibers will allow only a slight movement of the tooth within the socket, so they can adapt to the functional stresses. Okay, and also during the orthodontic treatment, what they will do, they will adapt by remodeling. Okay, and therefore they will enable the tooth movement, at the same time they will prevent loss of attachment. So this is a very beautiful diagram, you can definitely draw this in your paper for some extra marks. Moving on to fifth and sixth function of Sharpie's fibers. So again, they are very crucial in maintaining the health of pedontium and also enabling its regeneration, right? So in a healthy state, Sharpie's fiber contribute to the attachment apparatus, which ensures the integrity of the periodontal ligament, cementum, and the alveolar bone. They are also very important for healing and repair process, right? So as the PDL itself is a very dynamic tissue, so continuously there is a process of healing and repair occurring. So during periodontal therapy or after any trauma, the regeneration efforts focus on restoring the Sharpie's fibers to re-establish the attachment apparatus. As they are the key components of the PDL itself, so it is very necessary during the periodontal therapy or after trauma to restore the Sharpie's fiber so that they can enable the healthy periodontium. Sixth function is transmission of sensory stimuli. So as we know, PDL is a living tissue, right? It has certain mechanoreceptors which transfer the mechanical stimuli, right? So the Sharpie's fiber also has some sensory functions as they transmit the mechanical stimuli, right? Any kind of mechanical pressure such as during chewing, right? The mechanoreceptors which are present within the periodontal ligament, and this helps to regulate the chewing forces and prevent any overloading during the chewing, right? So this is very important function of the Sharpie's fiber, right? So it also has a very important function which is sensory in nature. This is very important to remember here. Moving on to the last function, bone remodeling and maintenance of the bone. So first of all, we'll talk about the influence of Sharpie's fibers onto the alveolar bone, right? So these fibers exert a tension on the alveolar bone during functional activities, right? This stimulates the bone remodeling and maintenance through the application of physiological stress, right? So there are two kind of stresses onto the tooth. One is physiological and other is obviously the pathological stresses. So in case of a physiological stress, these Sharpie's fibers exert small amounts of tension onto the alveolar bone, right? So whenever there is a functional load onto the surface of the tooth, via these Sharpie's fibers, the force is transmitted to the underlying bone, right? So this stimulates the bone remodeling under physiological stresses. Other function is adaptation to functional forces, right? So continuous remodeling of the bone with the help of the Sharpie's fibers and surrounding structures adapt to the changes in the masticatory forces, right? So it also has a very important role in enabling the PDL to adapt to the functional forces. Okay. Fibers in health and disease. So in health, these are well organized fibers which provide a strong attachment. So we have seen in the functions itself that the Sharpie's fiber, the main function of theirs is to provide a strong attachment system. Okay, so in disease what happens is there is a breakdown of the Sharpie's fibers which ultimately compromise the stability of the tooth, right? So in periodontitis we know that there is a mobility of the tooth within the socket. Now this is occurring because there is loss of the Sharpie's fibers. Okay, so also there is cementing, remodeling or resorption occurring which can further lead to fiber detachment. So in case of periodontitis we know that there is destruction of those periodontal fibers. Now along with those fibers, the Sharpie's fibers are also getting destroyed, right? And the main function of theirs is to support the tooth, maintain the integrity of the tooth within the socket by ensuring equal distribution of the occlusal forces. Okay, so when there is a disease which is causing destruction of these fibers, abnormal amounts of forces are transferred to the alveolar bone, right? So this can also contribute towards loosening of the tooth within the socket. Moving on to clinical relevance of these fibers, right? So first of all, in periodontal therapy, as we have seen, they are an important component of the periodontal apparatus. So every regenerative periodontal procedure will directly or indirectly involve regeneration and restoring the integrity of Sharpie's fibers. Okay, unless and until the integrity of the Sharpie's fibers is not taken into consideration, we cannot provide an effective periodontal therapy. Okay, next is the radiographical appearance. Now these fibers are obviously not directly visible, but by checking the integrity of the surrounding bone and the PDL space, we can see the ultimate health of the tooth, right? So if there is loss of the fibers, it can be inferred that there is some amount of abnormal forces which are acting onto the tooth, right? And also from the surrounding bone we can infer that if there are abnormal amounts of occlusal loading happening and there are no good Sharpie's fibers which are present to prevent the occlusal loading or to provide effective cushioning effect, then definitely there will be widening of the periodontal space which can be seen on the radiograph. Orthodontic considerations. Now obviously if one wants to achieve desired tooth movement without causing loss of attachment apparatus, then we definitely need Sharpie's fibers because they are providing a cushioning effect, right? They are ensuring only slight mobility of the tooth, right, via the controlled orthodontic forces. Okay, now this slight mobility of the tooth ensures there is a maintenance of integrity of the PDA, and at the same time there is no loss of attachment apparatus. Moving on to the summary, fibers are essential for stability of the tooth. That is their chief function or the main function to maintain the integrity of the tooth within the socket. So they are very essential to provide tooth stability. Then they play a critical role in periodontal health and disease. Yes, because for a healthy periodontium to carry out all its function, we need Sharpie's fibers. And in disease, when there is destruction of these fibers, there is tooth mobility. Okay, there is periodontitis. So they play a very critical role in periodontal health and disease. And not only in this, but also during periodontal regeneration therapies. Okay, these therapies are mainly focused on maintaining the integrity or ensuring that there is no further destruction of these Sharpie's fibers. Then understanding their structure and function helps us to guide the periodontal treatment as well as the orthodontic treatment. Okay, because we need control tooth movement, and for that we need Sharpie's fibers so that only slight tooth movement is occurring at a given point of time and there is no loss of attachment. So guys, that was all about Sharpie's fibers in detail. I hope I have covered all the important points. If you like this video, kindly consider subscribing to my channel. Till then, this is Dr. Snehal signing off. Bye bye. Take care.